Full Stack Basics presents Master JavaScript. Unlock the power behind the frameworks.
From episodes 6 to 9, we're going to work on creating a budget tracker app to track our income. Also, we're going to be able to track our expenses, keep an eye on our balance, and we're also going to enable the search for transactions. We're going to start with vanilla JavaScript, and then we're going to move on to React, where we're going to implement the same functionality using the framework. This is a great opportunity to see the JavaScript engine under React's hood. See you inside. Now that we're excited about what we're going to build in the next 4 episodes, let me move to truth number 6.
If you don't understand state, you don't understand React.
Or any framework or library for that matter. And this episode is going to prove it when we build our budget tracker with vanilla JavaScript. So let's get going. Open up your DevTruths projects folder, and inside here, we're going to create a folder for our budget tracker app. I'm going to call this folder DevTruths budget tracker-vanilla.js. Go ahead, create the folder, and then open it with Visual Studio Code. Now that you have opened the project with VS Code, let's go ahead and quickly set up the project like we have done in the previous episodes. Let's start with style.css. Go ahead and implement the styling for the body. Under here, and I'm just going to minimize this, go ahead and implement the styling for H1 and the form. Once this is done on your end, then let's go ahead and implement the styling for the input field, the button, and another button here. Go ahead and do the same. I'm going to minimize these ones here just so that you can see better. I'm going to save to reformat and scroll to the bottom. And then we're going to include styling for the unordered list and also for the list item like so. Please pause and implement this. And lastly, we're going to create 2 additional classes here. One in case the item is an income or an expense. So please pause and implement this as well. With this done, we're going to close out of here and we're going to create our index.html. Go ahead and do so. Let's go ahead and create the boilerplate like we have done in the previous episodes. Then we're going to simply link our index.html to the styling sheet like so. We're going to change the title to vanilla.js budget tracker right here where it says document. Now that you have this done, let's go ahead and work on the body. We're going to take it a little faster because we have done this before. We're going to include an H1 for the title. Then we're going to include a form with the ID of form, like so. You can get rid of the action. Go ahead and implement this. Then we're going to make some room inside of the form, and we're going to include a few fields. First, we want the input for the description of the income or expense. Then we want an input for the number or the amount of money that we are including in our budget tracker. And lastly, right inside of the form, we're going to include a button that reads add transaction, important. It has to be of type submit. Please pause and implement this. I'm going to minimize the form just so that it's clear to you what should be inside the form and what is out. So once I minimize the form, I'm going to just make some room here, and then I'm going to include an unordered list with ID of transactions. Please go ahead and do the same. Lastly, I'm going to include the script tag that points to our JavaScript file, which we're going to call app.js. Please pause and implement this. Now let's go ahead and create that app.js that we are calling here, and let's start working. First, we are going to create a variable for the transactions, like so. I'm going to call it transactions, and it's going to get the transactions list from the local storage. Yes, we're going to be working with local storage here. Pause and implement. Then we need to get access to items in the form so that then we can perform the event listener actions that we're going to implement next. So we need the form, we need the desk or description, amount, transactions, and balance. Please pause and implement this. Under here, we're going to actually implement a function called render. Please pause and include the function. Inside of this function, first we want that inside of the list, which is that on order list with the ID of transactions, we want to initialize the inner HTML as empty. Then we want to also initialize the total or the balance to 0. Pause and implement. I'm going to save to reformat so that we can keep working. And then inside of the render function, what we're going to do is that we're going to iterate through each one of the transactions. For this, we're going to use transactions.forEach, and then we're going to use tx for transaction, and then followed by a pair of curly braces. Please pause, implement, and make sure that the syntax is correct. With this implemented, I'm going to save to reformat. And then what we're going to do inside of here, inside of this pair of curly braces, is the following. First, we are going to create a list item or a list element that will go inside of the UL or unordered list that is called li. And for this, like I said here, we're going to create an li element inside of the document. Then each li, we're going to actually manipulate the text content by getting the description along with the dollar amount for each transaction. I'm going to save to reformat. Please pause and implement now. Right under here, we are going to provide an li with a class name. And for this, we're going to use conditional logic. See, if the amount is more than 0, then it's an income. But if it's less than 0, meaning is negative, then it's gonna take the expense class name. So go ahead and implement this. Last but not least, we are going to then append that list item to the list with the transactions, and then we're going to update the total with the amount for the transaction that was created in the form. Once again, I'm gonna save just so that we can reformat. Please pause and implement this. Right under the transactions for each loop, which I'm going to minimize just so that you see that I'm working outside of there, but we're still inside of the render function, we are going to set the balance text content with the total and set the updated transaction list to our local storage so that we can keep track like so. So please pause and implement these 2 lines of code. Now we can minimize our render function. We're done working here. And what we're going to do now is add an event listener for the form. More specifically, for the event in which the user submits the form. Please pause and implement. In this event listener, the first thing we are going to do is prevent the default form behavior like we have done in the past. Then we want to store the description value in a variable called desc or DESC. Pause and implement. We also want to store the amount input value in a variable called amount, and then we're going to parse it as a float data type. I'm going to save to reformat. Please pause and implement. Next, we're going to include conditional logic, and this is very simple. If there is no description and if there's no amount, we simply return. Basically, we exit out of the program. There's no point in processing that transaction. If there is a transaction, what we're going to do is actually include that transaction inside of the transactions list by using push. Then we're going to simply empty out the values in the form fields for the description and the amount. Please pause and implement. And then lastly, we are going to call our render function here right after everything is submitted so that then this all here can take place. So I'm going to minimize the render function again and let you finish implementing the event listener by including the call to the render function. Pause here and make sure that everything is implemented correctly on your end. With this done, I'm going to simply save. I'm going to now open index.html with live server. Meet me over at the browser.
Full stack basics, foundations, Learn tech and microsteps. Create a full-stack Kanban board prototype with Vanilla.js and the Gem stack, including registration, login, and drag-and-drop functionality without libraries. Learn more at fullstackbasics.io/projects.
In here, we can see the first version of our budget tracker app. So what I'm going to do here is test it by adding your salary. So I'm going to put your salary to $1 million a year because you deserve that. And then let's see an expense. So let's say you decided to take a nice vacation with your big fat salary and you rented a private island. So for this expense, I need to put a negative sign. And then let's say that costs you around $200,000 for the weekend, which is nothing to you, right? I'm going to add the transaction. And as you can see, we have that conditional logic that when it's income, it's green. And when it's an expense, it is red. Everything seems to be working great. Now, there's something that I missed, and that is the balance. So let's go back to the code for a second. Back to the code. What we need is that right under the H1 that reads budget tracker, we are going to include an H2 with the ID of balance and then with the message balance, colon, and then $0, because that gives us the initial value. Now remember, here in app.js, and I'm going to open it to the right, I'm going to close this so you can see, we are getting this element by ID, and then we're storing it in this variable called balance. And as you can see down here in the render function, we are adding the text content to the balance whenever it's updated. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and meet over at the browser again. So now at the browser, I included the salary back to 1 million. And now let's include the private island rental here, just so that we can see the balance update in real time. And with this, we have finished our initial implementation of the budget tracker in vanilla JavaScript. So what have we learned so far? Well, you have manually managed the state, which is the transactions. You have handled all the input events. You have calculated the total. And one thing that you also did is that you actually persisted this to the browser's local storage. So if you go on inspect and you go to the application tab, here in local storage, you will see here in transactions, we have our transactions persisted in local storage. And this is really good because now we know how these things work under the hood. So now it's time for React, but for that, I'll meet you in the next episode.